Okay, so we all know that leaving your whiskey out in direct sunlight is a bad idea, right? But how bad is it? Is this one of the worst things you can do with your whiskey, or does it not make that much of a difference? Well, I conducted an experiment. It took more than 3 months to prepare, and today on the channel, I'm gonna share the results. We're gonna test this objectively, we're gonna do a blind tasting, and we're gonna find out what happens to our whiskey when it's exposed to the sun, and how big of an impact does it make. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. Okay, so as I'm talking to you now, it's January, and we are going to take step one of a little experiment today with some of this Old Pulteney 12-year. I have a brand new bottle. It is still sealed, and I have an empty bottle of the same whiskey. So what I'm going to do is transfer about half of this fresh whiskey into the old empty bottle. We want to have 2 sample bottles that are about equal. One of these is going to go back in its original cardboard box that it came in, and it's going to go away in the cabinet, away from the sun. Its partner is going to go in front of a window in direct sunlight. See you in a few months. And now it's April. So here we are about 100 days or so, a little over 3 months, removed from the start of this experiment. These are my 2 Old Pulteney bottles. I marked which bottle was which on the back label, but I don't need to look at the label because look at this, look at the difference in color. One is, the color of this whiskey is fake. It has artificial color added, but it started out with this sort of golden color. Now the second bottle has this sort of light, sort of Pilsner beer color. The sun has bleached the color out of this whiskey in 3 months' time. So that doesn't look promising, but what matters more than color, especially with a whiskey with artificial color to begin with, is what happened to the flavor of this whiskey on the nose, on the palate. So I am going to do a tasting, a blind tasting of the 2 whiskeys to figure out exactly what, if anything, has happened as a result of the sun to these 2 samples of the same whiskey. Let's set it up. Blind tasting time. I have had the 2 samples, one the sun sample, one the not sun sample of the Old Pulteney 12-year placed blindly for me here. I do not know which is which, and I have the blindfold so I cannot see the color that might tell me which is which. One of the samples is marked so we know for certain which one is which. And I'm just going to go ahead and nose and taste and report to you what I am finding from the 2 samples. I'm going to start just on my right. And what I'm looking for here are the same notes that I had talked about in my recent review of this whiskey here on the channel a couple videos back. Like a little bit of a leather, kind of sea salt with some sweet vanilla and almost like a sort of cinnamon candy. And deep down in this sample, I'm getting the sweet underneath. So I'm getting several of those elements that I recall from this whiskey. So now we're going to go and just take a second. When you're going back and forth, you want to just keep clear and not just go directly one to the other before I go for sample number 2, which is here. Yeah, and I've got a big whiff of that sort of vanilla underneath those a little bit coarser elements. Yeah, with that sweetness running through. So here's a first impression. Neither of these has gone bad the way we think of like wine turning to vinegar. There is definitely a difference between them. And it is not overly dramatic in that one of them is like, ugh, this isn't even whiskey anymore. But there is a difference. I'm not going to get too far along until I have had the opportunity to do the tasting as well, but I can definitely tell that there's a lot of overlap between the two samples, even though they are noticeably different. So I'm going to go in for the palate now. So a lot of bourbon sort of elements on the palate, as I recall, sort of vanilla. And one of the big things, though, is there's an introduction of a little bit of a bitterness. I think I called it like a dark chocolate bitter, and that's definitely here. There was not much of a finish on this whiskey under normal circumstances. It's a 40% whiskey, but there's really not much here in this sample, and it's a good idea to clear your palate between samples when you're going back and forth here. So I got my water, which I successfully did not spill. I'm going to go in for the second one. Yeah, okay, so sample number 2's got a little bit more. This is not a very sort of big mouthfeel whiskey, but it's got a little bit more brownness and sort of creaminess on the mouthfeel, a little bit bigger vanilla, a little bit of a little bit more lively on the finish. So blind here, I can tell that there is definitely a difference between these two whiskeys. And it's not that hard to keep them straight. So I'm going to sort of the big reveal here. Do I have it right? Can I pick blindly the one that's been influenced by the sun? Is it all in my head? We're about to find out. Which is it going to be? I'm going to choose as the sun sample, sample number 1. Boom! It is correct, as I know from this sticker at the bottom that marks it as the sun sample. But honestly, there really was not that much suspense to me in being able to tell the two apart, because they're clearly different. It's clearly had an impact on the nose, but even more so on the palate. And what that impact is it's just turned down the volume on all of the flavor elements. Most of it's still here. This is not that complex a whiskey, but there's some stuff going on in it, and this one is just muted. But there's one flavor that it hasn't reduced, and it's that bitterness. And this whiskey had a sort of a welcome sort of bitter element to set off the sweet. I called it dark chocolate. It's definitely here. But that's the one element that's sort of on the same level, just everything else is turned down, so it's really out of balance. I don't know. I don't know if that is something that the sun has done to the chemical compounds in the whiskey and brought out the bitter, or maybe it just turned down the volume on everything but the bitter, and the bitter is just staying there. But it does have that streak running through it. It's definitely there on the palate. Very noticeable. The finish is even wispier and weaker. So, question is, exposing your whiskey to sunlight, UV light, is that a bad idea? Yes, answered. This is as much of a difference as you saw on the color, especially on the palate. It's clearly diminished this whiskey in only about 100 days of winter sun. It's not even the height of summer. So I would say that not only is this bad, but it's bad at a pretty impressive pace. Certainly more experiments to test this first hypothesis, but coming out of this, I would say that leaving the whiskey in the direct sun is a candidate for being the worst thing that you can do to your whiskey. Make sure you keep your whiskey out of the direct sun. If this video was helpful to you, for more videos like this, remember to subscribe. And if you are interested in what this whiskey is supposed to be like without having been experimented on, check out my recent review. I'm going to put a link to it right here.